Today is March the 9th, 2026. My name is John Johnson, Professor Emeritus of Justice Studies at ASU, where I taught for many years, along with our interview subject today. We're doing a Arizona State University Retirees Association Video History Project, and today we're located at University Center B206. Our technical support staff today is Don Doris and Elmer Gooding. David, could you please introduce yourself and state your name and the position you had at the point you retired?
My name is David Altheide. I came to ASU in 1974, retired in 2011 as a Regents Professor Emeritus. I'll be glad to talk a little bit about my years at ASU and some of the influences and some of the changes that I see having occurred. I was born in a small town in Sumner, Washington. My father was a mill worker, and he had come west as a young man as part of the WPA project, and that interested him in returning west. And that experience and his stories always made me very interested in the history of government support for people during the Depression era and since then. My mother worked part-time as a banker, and she had several small businesses. I had two brothers, both older, and a sister who was mentally handicapped. That was always important, I found in the later years, because it made me very sensitive and aware to people with certain kind of disabilities. And a number of my friends learned about her handicap and also became very tolerant of that. But that was a very important background. I worked in high school, I worked in summer jobs. One of my next door neighbors was a very successful lawyer. His house was always nicer than ours, and I always wondered what that would be like to be a lawyer. And so years later, when I started in college, I thought that's what I wanted to be. I had no idea what a lawyer did. And interestingly enough, when I tried to talk to him about his business, he never seemed interested in even telling me about it. He seemed like he was kind of bored with it. But at any rate, my older brother went to college. Our parents were very religious. I was raised in a fundamentalist background, and they weren't really sure education was the way to go, because that often seemed to misdirect people away from the gospel. My older brother was a bit of a rebel, and he did very well in college. He had a government loan, which was very important. He graduated from high school in 1958, I in 63, and he received this loan. It was called the National Defense Education Act loan, started by the Eisenhower administration after the Second World War to help create teachers and scientists, partly to help deal with the Cold War and develop some scientists. So he went through school, and he encouraged my other brother and I to also attend college. So we did, and we attended Central Washington State College. It's now Central Washington University, and I was there from 1964 to 1967. I was an aspiring baseball player, so I went and played baseball for a year at Central and had a very good experience. I also received NDEA funding, and it was a great deal. Of course, then things were very inexpensive. Tuition was $45 a year, and by today's standards, I think that had translated into something like maybe $500 a year. Of course, the tuition there is much higher for a lot of reasons. Had a wonderful experience at Central. I ended up studying sociology and philosophy. I had some outstanding professors. One of my main mentors was a sociologist named Virgil Olson. We call him Jerry Olson. And he and a number of philosophy professors, English professors, it was a small school, and they worked with students and they cultivated students. Central had some symposia they started. We could attend these and talk with some fine intellectuals throughout the world on topics. I actually had an argument once with a very distinguished professor, Sidney Hook, and he must have thought he was crazy, this undergraduate kid challenging some of his ideas. But it was that kind of place, and that undergraduate experience stayed with me, and I always wanted to sort of duplicate that. I left Central and went to the University of Washington. I received an NDA Title IV fellowship to study sociology. I had a very good education there. I was only there for about a year, but I learned a lot of traditional sociology called positivism, very quantitative, but I had some very good teachers. After a year there, I left and took my first job at Central Washington State, at Southern Colorado State College.
Wow, thank you. Well, can you tell us about how you arrived at ASU and what position you had and who hired you and what department you were in?
Well, let me back it up just a little bit at Southern Colorado State College, because that's related to this. Ironically, the first time I ever heard about ASU was when I was just out of high school, and one of my friends I played ball with, he was an exceptional baseball player, and he was being recruited by the then baseball coach, a guy named Bobby Winkles. And he said, yeah, they got a pretty good baseball team, I might go there. So while I was at University of at Southern Colorado State College, I taught a number of courses. We were involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement, civil rights movement, and at a conference I ran into a person who was from ASU, and she was very interested in maybe my joining the department there at some point. And those negotiations didn't go anywhere. I had just finished my master's degree, so we stuck around. So how I got to ASU was very interesting. Then from that point on, I went to graduate school, leaving Pueblo, Colorado, and basically 68. Prior to that, I met John Johnson there. Had some wonderful mentors at University of California, San Diego. One of my mentors, great professor, was Jack Douglas, but there were a number of other wonderful people there, Stanford Lyman and Joseph Gusfield, Aaron Sickerill. And we learned a lot about another kind of sociology involving qualitative research methods that was interested in more lived experience, watching people, doing observational studies, and the like. I made great friends there. When I got there in 1971, I left there in 1974, and the opportunity to attend ASU came up. I was going to go on John had accepted a position at ASU, and I was going there on basically maybe a one-year appointment as a substitute for a colleague, Bud Fuel, who was going on sabbatical, and they needed somebody to fill in. I was able to negotiate things to turn it into a 1.5-year appointment, and it turned out to be very good. I learned a lot about the collegiality at ASU. There were a number of very good people there. At the time, the chairman was a family sociologist named Bernie Farber, and he was very supportive. Lynn Gordon became the later chairman, and the president was John Schwada, and I learned then a little bit more about big-time universities. It was much larger than Southern Colorado State College.
Great. What was it like teaching sociology here at ASU?
Well, it was a wonderful experience. While I was at Southern Colorado State College for 3 years, I taught a number of courses. So I had a pretty good background in sociology at that point. You basically had to learn while doing the things. And so I was able to teach some of the same courses. I found the students to be very interesting. It was there were challenges, of course. We were in the old social sciences building, which over the years had a number of physical issues with it, and but I had met a number of fine colleagues. I learned a little bit about bigger department, academic politics. People, for the most part, were very kind, but I also learned the ins and outs, the do's and don'ts, and people had certain preferences. For example, one person there wasn't very happy with me because I had purchased a house before I received tenure, and this person thought that was being a little uppity, I guess, a little out of kilter. But by and large, it was all very good. The faculty was very collegial. We'd have lunch together in the lunchrooms. The culture was very interesting, and we learned a great deal about other topics in sociology. Sociology at the time was primarily what's called a service department for providing undergraduate requirement courses to fulfill general arts and sciences requirements. A few decades later, it would change, and as grants became more important and so forth, sociology didn't have a lot of those, and years later, it would actually merge into Department of Family Studies.
Yeah, I'd like for you to say a few more words about having lunch in the lunchroom. I mean, for me, that was a very important part of faculty socialization. But I mean, all of the senior faculty would show up every day in the lunchroom, and we would have this informal discussion while eating our lunch for an hour or so. But did you find that an important kind of socialization experience?
You know, I really did, because I mean, mainly it was the norms were they'd let you speak, but they were kind. But the norms were you were junior professors, and you listened, and you know you paid proper deference. But it was good to meet some of these senior people in a more informal way, and you get to know them. They would talk about their families, and you realize that they had families, and sometimes there were hint at problems they had with children. And as a new father myself, this was always interesting, seeing in fact they were human beings, and although some were very eminent, it cut through the device, and it also made them, I think, far more welcoming and accepting, pretty much for, you know, who you were, and I enjoyed that. And that's something I understand doesn't happen very often these days.
Not in the online Zoom age.
Yes.
Now, your own teaching interest and what you later became very well known for is in mass media, which is not a mainline sociology course, although most sociology departments have mass media. But was that a problem at all, fitting your own interest in with the traditional curriculum in sociology?
Yeah, it was sometimes a challenge. Mass media had sort of been the province of communication studies, and some political scientists would focus on it in studies of propaganda, and there are some sociology courses that would have on mass media and maybe propaganda. But my dissertation research at San Diego involved a study of a television newsroom, and the nature of the research there was focused on how do people actually produce the news, not so much audience effects, but what do they actually do? How do journalists working with film and so forth? And so that was very important. So I wanted to carry some of that over. So I was able to develop a few courses at ASU and to teach some topics of that. I was able to develop some of the work that we did from my first book called Creating Reality, and then gradually further develop some ideas about communication studies and how this affected audiences. And with a colleague in sociology, a very bright guy, became a wonderful friend, Bob Snow, we collaborated and wrote a book called Media Logic, in which we examined how the TV formats and other communication formats actually had an effect and an impact on what was presented and what people were taking from messages. And that work in turn led into other studies over the years, dealing with how TV worked to try to attract an audience, that I learned in my studies in San Diego. And I realized they used a great deal of entertainment, that was important to grab the audience, as a reporter explained to me. And one of the ways they used entertainment and developed it, of course, was just crime stories, because crime was important for the community, but crime stories spoke to fear, and that attracted audiences. It would attract attention. So over the years, I discovered people used fear a lot in movies, popular culture, and so on, to kind of grab audiences. And pretty soon politicians picked up on that too, I learned, and that they would use fear to promote fear, to try to engage some of their own topics, some of their own agendas, in order to try to keep people interested and maybe gain votes. So that led to other research that I did on the promotion of use of fear in political propaganda. And several other works came out of that, including the more recent book that I wrote called Gonzo Governance, the Media Logic of Donald Trump.
What would you say about the early challenges of your career, whether those were political, financial, administrative? What were your major challenges?
Well, I think the probably the toughest part was at first finding colleagues interested. And at ASU, we were able to find a critical mass, not only with you, but also Bob Snow and some other people, but also finding a certain amount of financial support. We didn't need a lot, because the kind of research I was doing did not involve a lot of big grants or anything. But it was nice just to have the time to do some of the work. And one of the things that was terrific in a few years later, when we transferred, especially to another college, but even in sociology we had it. Sociology and the College of Liberal Arts had a wonderful small grants program. And what that meant was during the summer, if you submitted a decent several-page proposal, you could get funding that would pay about 1 month's salary in the summer. And you could use that in order to focus on your research. And that was very helpful for freeing up, I think, freeing up time. I think those are some of the main challenges. Of course, maintaining family life, keeping up with family, paying attention to children. Those are always a challenge. But I was lucky to have a wonderful wife, Carla, who helped me do that, and made sure that I spent plenty of time with our family.
Good. And who was the dean at that time?
Well, at the time in sociology, it was Charles Wolfe. And I was really taken by Dean Wolfe. And later on I realized he'd become a bit of a role model for me as an academic. I never became a dean, but Dean Wolfe was a biologist, as I recall, and he had an ongoing research agenda, but he was also a very personable and efficient dean. And he paid attention to faculty. He was very fair. He always treated junior faculty with respect. And in later years, after Dean Wolfe retired, I always wanted to tell him how much I appreciated his work. And so I saw him going to a basketball game at ASU, and I approached him, and he kindly remembered who I was, or at least he said he did. And I told him I really appreciated his good work that he did on behalf of the faculty, and especially supporting assistant professors at the time. It was very helpful.
Of all your achievements at ASU, what would you regard as the ones that give you the greatest pride?
You know, there were a number, but I must really say I think the biggest achievement predated ASU, and that was finding my wife, Carla, who we've now been married almost 60 years. But she was always very supportive. She was always attentive when I would spend time going on and on about my work and research. She was a nurse and didn't know a lot about research, but was always supportive. Having taken care of our children and being able to have that kind of support and encouragement. I think the students we had were probably some of the greatest accomplishments and satisfaction. A number of the students went on to become faculty members in their own right. Indeed, several have now retired, which is clearly a way of marking time, you know. And so that's been wonderful. The students have been supportive, and I sort of bask now in their accomplishments, what they're doing.
Your career, you were just in sociology 8 years, and then you went over to the College of Public Programs, to some extent by the initiative of Nicholas Henry. Now, so there's a whole another part of your career here that you barely touched upon. What would you say about your experience with Nick Henry and the College of Public Programs?
Well, one of the reasons that we wanted to transfer from sociology is that some of our interests expanded, and when I say I think John's as well, we became interested in more some social justice issues. And as assistant professors in sociology, some of our ideas didn't always mesh well with some of the other faculty that were there. And so we transferred to this new program. It was now called the Center for Criminal Justice in the brand new College of Public Programs. And we were helped in this endeavor. Transfers weren't very common then, but the provost was a man named Page Mulholland, and another very capable administrator that kindly helped us was Elmer Gooding. Made this transfer possible. It wasn't always smooth. The chairs of criminal justice, Michael Mushino, and the faculty were welcome to us, and we entered this new School of Justice Studies. The dean of the College of Public Programs was a very personable man, a political scientist, a public affairs scholar, Nick Henry. And he was very welcoming to us and was interested in developing new courses and expanding the college and trying to provide more of a public policy, public affairs kind of agenda. He was also able to contribute to our research support, and by and large was very encouraging in this new collegial environment.
And you were selected to be a Regents Professor in 1991, one of the first, so certainly in the first 10. And how would you describe that experience? I mean, did that change your academic career at all?
Well, it was a great honor to be selected as a Regents Professor. It did have some nice benefits. There was a small stipend that went with it I could use for research. But it brought me in contact with some other very eminent professors on campus. But it also became a very humbling appointment, because at that point I began reflecting on my good fortune and the importance of contingencies and context in much of my whole life. How being at the right place at the right time, having people who were supportive and would help you out. And as I reflected back on the years now, it's so difficult now to get a job, a tenure type job in a university. I mean, it made me realize that a lot of that some of the Regents professors, myself included, and especially a lot of faculty members, that I'm not sure in today's academic environment I'd even be able to get a job. The competition is so tough. The faculty coming out are so good, but the title of Regents Professor was definitely a benefit, and it helped me contribute a little bit more to the university. I could work on some other committees at the university level, and try to contribute in some small part to some other changes that ASU was undergoing, because ASU was undergoing a lot of changes about then.
What's the best memory you have of ASU?
Boy, again, I think one of the fondest memories was sharing experiences with my wife and colleagues, knowing that over the 30 years that we were contributing to justice studies, expanding that concept nationally, internationally, working with a lot of faculty, that things were going very well. We expanded the concept. We expanded our idea of media logic, and that became a real mainstay later on in communication studies. There were some tremendous events in ASU's history, I think, that mattered when ASU beat Michigan State in the Rose Bowl, and being part of that. And it was very interesting because those kind of events marked the turning point in the stature of ASU at the time. The national stature was we were really a major university that was happening. And I think being part of those experiences was very beneficial.
David, what would you say are the key moments that you remember about being here at ASU?
Well, without trying to avoid missing too many people, I mean, there was friends that I made, colleagues that I made. I mean, Bud Field, Bob Snow, former chairs of justice studies, Michael Mushner, John Hepburn, John Aguilar, a colleague in anthropology, Marie Provine, Marjorie Zatz, that they shepherded and helped and gave a lot of support. I think one of the key moments in teaching that I remember was on the day of 9/11 attacks. I had an evening class, an introductory class, and we agreed we'd hold the class, and most of the students showed up. And I departed from my sort of planned schedule that I'd been on, and I presented them with a unit on World War II and the incarceration of Japanese Americans. And I spoke about how we've got to be careful now not to blame Muslim Americans and not to come down on people from the Middle East and create these same mistakes that we did when President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 that led to the concentration camps. And little could I have imagined that several years later, toward the end of my career, to this day, that we might actually have a president who would be oriented to incarcerating people. But that moment in teaching for me was sort of a highlight. One of the other things that we did is we helped develop this general topic of qualitative research methods. And not only in our department, but interdisciplinarily on our campus and throughout the country. And we're able to move that whole research agenda along. I thought that was a nice accomplishment.
But you've been retired now 14 or 15 years. What have you been doing in retirement?
Well, one of the wonderful things is we followed our children and grandchildren to the San Diego area. So we now live in North County, San Diego. We spend a lot of time with them. We spend more time exercising and keeping up with our grandkids than we, it's the best way to live. I can't think of a better way to live. I still work a bit. I've published some 6 books since I retired. We still try to keep active, do some reviewing work, but mainly we enjoy life and enjoy each other, and really take a lot more time to smell the roses and spend time together with family and friends. We've enjoyed that very much.
Do you have any comments or questions in areas we haven't covered here today?
Well, I think one of the only things I would stress is for students to pursuing a college degree is enter the academy with an open mind. Look around and check out different majors, different topics, different courses, different lectures. It's like a great smorgasbord, and you only have a chance to do that during your college career. My daughter did that, and even though we lost her to the University of Arizona, she completed her degrees, including a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology there. She had no idea that's what she was going to do when she started out. She took an anthropology course and changed her whole way of thinking, and was excited. Our son also got a degree from ASU after being recruited as a baseball player. He transferred to San Diego State. He came back and got a degree in ASU. So I would say look around, find your passion, and for young faculty members coming in, there are many challenges, but you've got to be passionate and pursue it. Otherwise, maybe try doing something else. But above all, be kind, support your colleagues and your students.
Thank you very much, David.
Good.